Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I hope you're very well. You're listening to Autistic Voices. I'm Evalynne Charmer. I'm a paediatric therapist and I'm the director of EdElf Child Therapy Limited and its sister training company for therapists, the Child Hypnotherapy Institute. And I've recently been diagnosed autistic myself. So I'm very inspired to bring you a diverse and rich range of autistic voices from the community. People who are diagnosed, people who are not diagnosed, people who work alongside and collaborate with autistic families or autistic adults, people who identify as neurodivergent. Please come and join the conversation. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at Evalynne, that's EVALYNNE, at childhypnotherapyinstitute.com or contact me via the show. Thank you for joining me with Autistic Voices. Hello, it's Evalynne Charmer here with Autistic Voices. Thank you for tuning in. And I'm really honoured today because it's the start of Autism Acceptance Week this week. And I'm talking to a lovely lady, Dr. Laura Hull, PhD. So welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, gosh, it's an absolute pleasure. And I know you've probably got a really busy week on. So I appreciate you making the time to come on to the podcast. So I understand you've been doing some research through the Centre for Psychological Approaches for Studying Education in Bristol. Is that right?
Yes, so I actually work at Bristol Medical School, but I have my finger in a variety of different pies at the University of Bristol.
Well, on behalf of myself as an autistic woman and all of the autistic people across the whole world, I just want to say thank you for all of your work on everything you do, focusing on autism, because I think it's incredible research that's coming out. So my understanding is then that this research you're going to talk about was conducted with your charity partner Ambitious About Autism, and Vanish. And it included 517 autistic children and young people. So tell us a bit about the research.
So this was a survey that Vanish ran with Ambitious About Autism, which is a charity that supports autistic young people, really just to find out a little bit about their lives and what's important to them, and with a particular focus on the experiences of autistic girls and non-binary people. Because as I'm sure you're aware, it's often much harder for girls and non-binary people and women to get an autism diagnosis. And so the campaign is really just designed to try and raise awareness of this and hopefully make that process a little bit easier for the people and the families that are going through that.
Yeah, and it's really important because, it's huge. I was diagnosed age 53. But it wasn't picked up on when I was young. So, but I also worked as an assistant head in a special needs school which focused on autism and worked with autistic boys and girls, but it was predominantly male for those very reasons that you're talking about. So thank you for bringing that to everyone's attention through this research. So what does the research reveal about the importance of clothing for autistic young people?
So the survey found that 92% of the people who were surveyed are affected generally by sensory sensitivity, and clothing in particular was really important for 73% of those people. So as I'm sure you're aware, many autistic people use their clothing to sort of regulate both their moods and their sensory experiences. So picking clothing that is comfortable, soft, doesn't have kind of scratchy seams or tags or anything. And also often textures that can be quite reassuring to touch. So many autistic young people in particular like having a favorite item of clothing because that can be something that's really comforting and familiar, that smells familiar, that doesn't overwhelm them with the sensory intake. And it can be something to sort of regulate when the rest of the world can feel too overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking through some of the research and it's a really high number, isn't it? There was a figure of 70% of autistic girls and non-binary people said that clothes can actually make or break their daily lives. And that was reflected certainly when I was working in special needs school, because we had a non-uniform policy for that reason. And we found that the young people were able to focus a lot more, able to focus for longer, able to regulate better when they were wearing comfortable clothing that they felt comfortable in, and it's different for everybody or familiar with. So actually on the ground, I've seen that in evidence, and I feel the same myself as an autistic woman. The tiniest little piece of plastic still in my clothing when I've bought something new can absolutely ruin my day. It's just it's really important. So why do autistic people experience sensory issues?
So we don't entirely know why autistic people have these sort of hypersensitivities, so increased sensitivity to sensation. Some people have suggested it could be because autistic people have slightly different wiring in the brain, so that the messages that come in telling us about our senses are kind of more extreme than for non-autistic people. But then we also know many autistic people have hyposensitivity, so reduced sensitivity to certain sensations. So some people might really enjoy the sensation of weight being pressed on them, like a weighted blanket or something, because it could be that they're not getting that much information from the normal sensations around them. And so that can be a way to just sort of really reinforce it and help regulate. So there's something sort of different about the way that senses are processed, but we still don't know that much about why that actually is.
Yeah. So according to the study, almost all of the autistic girls and non-binary people who were involved in the study said they were affected by sensory sensitivity, about 94%. So, it's a really common trait. I know that people with autism have a variety of different traits on a spectrum, but that's one really super common one.
And I think it's something that non-autistic people just aren't aware of.
Yeah.
I think it's as a non-autistic person, I'm not naturally as aware of the environment around me or the sounds that are coming through or the smells in a room until I'm with autistic people who pick up on it. So I think it can be so much harder, particularly for autistic children in kind of non-autistic environments, to have to be constantly explaining why they're so overwhelmed to people who don't experience the world in the same way.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful research. I think it's really interesting as well. It's not just about the sort of feel and the comfort and the material, but that there was 42% of those in the research said it concerned them if their clothing smelt different as well, or and I think a third, 36%, were talking about stains on their clothing bothering them as well.
Absolutely. And I think that sort of attachment to clothing is something that can be so meaningful for so many people, that, particularly for parents of autistic children, if you do have to wash the clothing or it gets ripped or torn or something, it's such an extra stress to have to try and find something to replace it that smells and looks and feels exactly the same.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I think, you can see parents sometimes and carers struggling in public because an item has been lost or ripped or torn or something. And, children, young people can absolutely really get very overwhelmed by that. So I think, my message out there, if you're listening, is if you see somebody having a huge meltdown or a child having a meltdown, please don't jump to any conclusions, because you just don't know what's happening for that family, and it's really stressful for them. So I think it's brilliant that it's the first time this kind of research has been done, right?
Yeah, I think it's the first time it's been such a kind of representative sample as well, having such a large proportion of girls and women and non-binary people, because a lot of the older autism research has been based predominantly with boys and men. Yeah. So we're still just learning a little bit more about how girls and women's and non-binary people's experiences might be slightly different.
Yeah, absolutely. So just going on from that then, Laura, what do we know, or what did the study show about the differences in boys and girls' diagnoses?
So we know that girls are diagnosed roughly 3 times less often than boys with autism. And we don't entirely know why this is. So it could be because autism is genuinely more common in boys compared to girls. But we also see that girls and women are diagnosed later on average, so about 2 years later on average. And it can take them a lot longer to get a diagnosis from first sort of being considered for autism. And we also know that we've identified quite a few biases against women and girls and non-binary people during the diagnostic process. So a lot of people have a sort of conception that autism is just a male condition. And while it's really important that we recognise and support autistic men and boys, that means that sometimes women and girls and non-binary people can be left behind because autism isn't the first thing that someone necessarily thinks of.
Yeah, and I think, from my own experience as a professional, and I work now as a therapist focusing on neurodivergent children, young people, I find that it's sometimes it's about presentation, and I don't want to generalize too much, but certainly it's more common for boys to display external experiences of their neurodivergence, and girls can very much mask and be very internalized. And also, I've come across a lot of young people who are non-binary or female who get misdiagnosed with social, emotional, mental health issues, or what used to be called EBD, emotional behavioral difficulties. I hate that term. But, that it can be seen as, or even personality disorders. So I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and just missing it. So I do think that people are becoming more informed, more aware, and hopefully things are improving all of the time. I know Christine McGuinness has been out in the sun this morning and out on media talking about this research, which is really brilliant. We need more people to know about it, talk about it. So it's very exciting, isn't it? And this waiting. So this waiting of sort of 2 to 4 years, to get a diagnosis, it's it's just too much, isn't it?
Absolutely, because that's 2 years, 4 years that person is not getting the support that they might need, isn't getting the accommodations at school or work that they might need, but also is just not having that understanding of themselves and an explanation for why they might have felt different. And obviously, the waiting lists for autism assessments in the UK are really long for everyone. So it's an issue that really affects everyone who's thinking about whether they might be autistic. But I think the fact that it can take even longer for women and girls is just really striking.
It's really striking. And I think from my experience, Laura, working directly with children and families affected, and maybe waiting for assessments and things like that, it often is that these kinds of questions come up for families around times of great pressure and stress. So it might be that the young person's going through GCSEs, for example, or transitioning between primary and secondary education, or going on to sort of colleges and sixth forms, because struggling with transition's a really big one as well. And, can't afford that time to wait for 2 years or 4 years, to find out. By then they might have finished their education. It's been really, really, really struggle for them, really stressful. Okay, well, we'll move on to finding out what you think that might be helpful for families. Any advice or tips you have for them in terms of managing with sensory issues and clothing and everything?
I mean, I think just trying to sort of keep things as similar as possible, having those routines maybe around kind of laundry days where there's an established alternative item of clothing to wear if something that's a favorite needs to be in the wash. I'm sure I don't need to tell you how important routines can be for that sort of familiarity and comfort. So I think particularly for parents and for families, just sort of building in those routines and allowing for things to go wrong when they do, because there are always going to be issues. There are always going to be, sudden tears or stains or smells, and accepting that might cause a meltdown or that might kind of ruin the child's day, but it's not their fault. They're not being naughty. They're not sort of trying to act out. It really is that difficult to cope with that change, and often that overwhelming to have that sensation. So I think just patience and understanding is the best thing that we can do.
Yeah, and my appeal on the back of that is out to schools and education providers, just to sort of try to be a bit more aware that trying to force a child into a stiff feeling blazer or a scratchy jumper or something isn't going to be helpful in terms of them accessing their education, feeling comfortable to be in school. So I think just having a rethink about how clothing impacts people with autism and other neurodivergent conditions, of course. Okay, so tell me about this new exhibition. This sounds exciting. I know there's a new free exhibition starting today. Is it starting today? Or it's 29th of March?
Yeah, this Wednesday. So this is an exhibition hosted by Vanish, again in partnership with Ambitious About Autism. It's called Me, My Autism and I, and it is a gallery exhibition at the Oxo Gallery space in London, open from this Wednesday until Sunday, the 2nd of April. And it's really just a collection of stories from autistic young people, particularly girls and non-binary young people, about their favourite items of clothing. So it's photos and sort of replications of this clothing, along with the stories of these young people about what the items of clothing mean to them. Maybe it's representing an interest that they're really passionate about, or it's something really comforting that they wear when they're feeling overwhelmed. And the idea is really just to invite everyone to come and visit it, to learn a bit more about what it's like to be autistic and how important clothing can be.
Yeah, it looks amazing. So that's from Wednesday, 29th of March, and it's on till Sunday, the 2nd of April, to mark World Autism Acceptance Week. It's at the Oxo Tower, if you'd missed that. And it starts at 11, so don't go any earlier. It's 11 till 6 every day. And it showcases the intimate, powerful stories of 12 young autistic girls and non-binary people. And it says on the programme that it's a multi-sensory space aiming to raise awareness and spark conversation. And so, you can get a 3D perspective of the clothes, understand the impact living with autism has on these girls and non-binary people and their everyday life. So well done to Vanish and Ambitious About Autism for getting that together, and for the Oxo Tower for putting that on. So we're nearly coming to the end. Is there anything else that you want to point out about the research, Dr. Hull, before we finish today?
I think it's just really kind of demonstrating how challenging it can be to be autistic in a non-autistic world, and again, particularly for girls, women, and non-binary people. I think something that was really striking was with the survey was sort of asking people about their experience of diagnosis, and many, particularly of the sort of women or non-binary adults who took part in the survey, sort of talked about not being believed when thinking that they're autistic, or really experiencing quite a few kind of direct challenges or biases during the assessment process. So I think it's just trying to raise that awareness, to kind of encourage people to consider autism as an option, and then obviously to go through the diagnostic process if that's something that feels meaningful for you. But that was the main takeaway for me from the survey, was just the kind of difficulty in understanding themselves and getting access to that.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about sort of one of the benefits of, sometimes I talk to people about this and they say, I'm not sure whether I want to go through having a label or whether I should label my child. And I think there's something missing there about how important it is to certain people. The majority of people who are diagnosed that I've spoken to over the last 2 years when I've been doing this show, and through my therapy work and training and other things I do, I come in contact with a lot of autistic boys, girls, non-binary people, parents, carers, everybody. And I would suggest it's around 96% of those people are really happy that they've had a diagnosis, have said that it really helps inform their identity, helps them understand themselves, helps them to accept who they are, and not just accept it, but actually celebrate it and learn about all of their strengths as well as the things they find challenging. So I definitely think it's worth doing that. And what's your advice about how to go about that? If there's a family out there thinking maybe we should look into this, where should they begin?
I would say first step is to talk to your GP. So if your child is in school, you can also talk to your teacher and talk to the special educational needs coordinator at the school. But the GP is really should be the first port of call, because they can then refer you on to the specialist autism services that are appropriate for your age. And also, hopefully, GPs are becoming a lot more aware of autism now, so they might be able to sort of discuss what the diagnosis would mean for you, and kind of give you some support in the meantime as well.
Yes, and if your child or young person is attending school or or an alternative provider, there should be somebody you can speak to at the local authority who is a special educational needs specialist, and there should be a SENCO attached to your school, which is a special educational needs coordinator that you could talk to about the process and anything that comes up for you, any questions you might have. So do reach out and speak to people. There's loads of brilliant stuff on social media as well. And the Ambitious About Autism, the charity you mentioned earlier, they've got a fantastic website. Do you want to just mention something about them?
Yes, so they are a brilliant charity. They offer support for young people and for families. Particularly, they offer sort of support around education and also getting into employment. So I would definitely go to their website, ambitiousabouautism.org.uk. And also, if people just want to learn a bit more about autism, Vanish have put together a section of their website, vanish.co.uk/autism, which just provides a bit of an overview and then has links to Ambitious About Autism for some more detailed information.
And well done to Vanish for getting involved and supporting autism awareness. So I think that's fantastic. And just looking myself at the Ambitious About Autism website, there's loads of information on there about all the stuff that Dr. Laura Hall's been talking about. There's information about the research that she was discussing and the statistics, but there's also stuff about the exhibition at the Oxo Tower, and all sorts of different things. So ambitiousabouautism.org.uk. And what's your plan for the rest of the week, Dr. Hall?
I'm very excited to be attending the launch of the Me, My Autism and I event. So I think the launch is on Tuesday before it opens to the public on Wednesday. So that's the highlight of my week, definitely, is getting to see the young people's stories and see all of the hard work that the campaign team have put in for that.
That's amazing. And for those 12 young people, if you're out there listening to the show, this show, Autistic Voices, can I just applaud you on behalf of all of my listeners and everybody I work with and all the children and young people that I represent here today, for coming forward and for being out there and for, putting yourselves in the public eye in the way you have in order to educate everybody else. And I really wish you well for your show. I'm up in Yorkshire. I won't be able to attend, unfortunately, but I'll be looking at all the social media updates about it. So good luck, everybody. And thank you for your time, Dr. Hall. It sounds like you've got a really busy week, so I really appreciate you coming on the show. And good luck with the research going forward.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I'm Evalynne Charmer. This is Autistic Voices, and special thanks to our guest of the week.